Welcome to the Under the Lights podcast. The podcast for up-and-coming cinematographers, lighting camera operators, and photographers. Learn from the professionals and land the bigger projects. Please welcome your host, Cy Gamble.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Under the Lights podcast. The podcast for those just starting out in the film and video industry and for those who are looking to progress. I think I owe you a little bit of an apology in that this episode comes to you a couple hours later than usual, and that's down to the kids being back at school and life just getting in the way of things a little bit. But we're here, it's still Monday, and we've got another fantastic guest on the show this week. And who is that guest, I hear you ask? Well, this week we've got a good friend of mine on the show. His name's Matt Davies. He's a DOP working out in Australia. We got together a few weeks ago to chat about transitioning from the UK to Australia, what it's like to work out there, and also taking a sideways step within the industry to land the bigger projects. Before we get Matt on the show, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all of our listeners. Thank you so much for subscribing, for commenting, for passing on the word. If you want to show your appreciation at this stage, please just hit the subscribe button on your podcast provider, and that makes a huge difference to what we're able to do. I think it's now time I stopped talking and introduced our guest. Matt, it's a great pleasure to introduce you on the Under the Lights podcast. Could you just tell our listeners a little bit about what you do?
So I primarily now at the moment, I'm actually a focus puller, but I have been a camera operator and also cinematographer to an extent for many years. I have operated and still do operate on a lot of documentary and a lot of corporate work and commercials, but I also focus pull on some bigger dramas, bigger commercials, and also assist on bigger documentaries as well. So I'm based in Australia, and there's I suppose Brisbane in this area, you kind of have to be a bit of a Swiss Army knife and, play in a few different areas to have consistent work there.
So looking back on your career so far, do you see yourself more as a focus puller or more as a DOP?
I think it was definitely a choice. I mean, I used to be directly out of university. I was an ENG camera operator, and then I operated in sports after that, and again corporate. But then I actually went over to short films and commercials in England, and I was focus pulling then. And when I came over here, I got advised from a few different people, to go straight in as a camera operator or a cinematographer, and I suppose I tried it that way, but I didn't really have the network, and I guess to an extent as well the skill level to be able to attain that work in that position when I first got here. So I ended up reverting back to focus pulling in order to get those higher end jobs. So I do love focus pulling, but I think I guess I've been doing it for a while. Number of years now, and do love it.
So I just want to go right back to the beginning. Take me to the beginning of your life. You grew up in Greater Manchester. Where did this love of videography come from? Where did this passion come from?
Well, I used to. I think it must have been about 2013. Used to go skateboarding with my mates quite a bit, and my mum and dad had a Super VHS camcorder, and I remember borrowing it or sneakily taking it out of the house without the permission, probably half the time. And we used to take it skateboarding and film each other and make these little clips. And we must have been doing that for, I don't know, up until it was up until we went to college. And we'd spent several years filming literally everything we did. And we ended up editing it into a feature-length film. Must have been about 90 minutes long. And that was actually the reason. I mean, I originally, when I enrolled in university, I was supposed to be going in to do product design. And in the end, I changed probably within a week or two to the BATAR course in Salford because I thought I'd give it a go. I never thought to do film or TV was a realistic career, so I was a bit hesitant about going into that as a career. So I just changed last minute.
So you went to Salford Uni, and there's always this debate of whether you should do film school or not do film school, go out and get the experience. How invaluable were the networking opportunities and the training that you received while you were at uni?
It's funny because actually, my little brother, he's 10 years younger than me, and he asked me the exact same question before he went, and it was tough to give advice on it because I think the course in itself, probably the biggest learning curve was just maturing over that age, 18 to 21. Having the maturity to go into a career and not just end up, I suppose, ruining it before you even started because you're 18 and you're going out drinking. And obviously, like, some people are a lot more focused than that. But for me, I suppose it was those few years that it took me to mature to the point where I could really focus on a career and take it seriously enough not to not to mess it up before I even got there. But no, I think the most valuable thing that came out of it was probably one or two things. Our Salford University used to have a direct connection to a TV channel that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, but it was a local news channel called Channel N. And that was absolutely invaluable because it gave me literally a few months after finishing uni, I went directly into a full-time job there as a camera operator. And that's really what gave me the foundation that I have and has been so valuable up until today. And I still, from that job, have lessons that I've learned that I still use day in, day out. And I suppose the other valuable thing that came out of uni was the network, and that was absolutely huge. The people I went to uni with, now when you look at them today, they're working on, documentaries, some of them at the BBC, some of them working on Ridley Scott feature films. Everyone that seems to come out of that uni has done very well.
Yeah, I can echo that because I know a few people that have been to that uni and they've all gone on to do really, really good things within the industry. Do you think that's something that's specific to that university? Were they really good at guiding you down these paths?
There's a couple of good tutors. Maybe it wasn't so specific to the course, but I think there was a couple of good tutors there, which were Mary Rafe and Paul Barron. And they were the people that I suppose had been in the industry and really pushed you and tried to help you get into the industry. And I think it was more so the tutors than the course that made it, that allowed us to have the opportunities that we did have.
And what sort of things did you actually learn on the course? I've noticed that you're down as a loader. Was that something that you learned at university while you were there, or is that something that you've learned later in life?
No, that was something that was learned later, probably a few years later, actually. Our course was mainly digital, so I think it was DVC Pros that we were learning on. But funnily enough, we learned on DVC Pros, and then we shot everything on, even the final project on the DVC Pros. But the year after I left, I remember, I think they got they updated the cameras. I can't remember what it was to. I think it was P2 series cameras, so still more broadcast orientated than film. But in terms of loading, I think if you want to learn to load, probably directly going into the industry is your best bet. I'm not even sure if they would teach you that at film school. I think you've already got to have that as a foundation.
Yeah. Is that something that you mentioned your brother Josh as well? Is that something that he's been involved in or keen to get involved in? So he's obviously been through the same course as well, and probably had the benefit of the more improved kit that they've invested in recently. But as a whole, is he getting involved in sort of film aspects of stuff as well, or is he staying mainly digital?
Well, I tried to give him my best advice from the learnings that I had, in that I suppose the last 10 years or so, 12 years, however long I've been doing it, it's been very much like moving from one area of the industry to the other and kind of being skilled in all these different areas, but a master of none. And I think the people that I've seen with the most consistent work that took a different route to what I did is people that have got involved in high-end TV and film. So my advice to him was to head into that narrative production, drama production, because I think it's more sustainable. There's more of a future in it. It's more skilled. It'll always challenge you more. There's more to aim for. Yeah.
And as a side note, does it annoy you how good he is at such a young age?
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably better than me.
So let's talk post-university. Now, I know in the months, years after you graduated, you had some experience on This Is England and Ideal on BBC Three. Can you just take us along your path post-university and the opportunities and training that you had then?
Yeah, so as I said, I went to Channel M directly after uni, and that was ENG and news, and I stopped there for 2 years before the GFC hit and I got made redundant. The channel actually shut down in the end. But from there, I'd learned going into any scenario and having to build sequences at the drop of a hat, and how to shoot in sequence, how to light with the limited lighting that you had, mostly natural, not very rarely artificial. How to kind of like shoot to edit. And then, once I got made redundant, it was kind of a nervous several months until I started freelancing on things like Sky Sports and ESPN, and got to go around Europe a few times on a few different tours, shooting superbikes and rugby and football. And that was a lot of fun. But I kind of, out of luck, when I was at uni, I'd worked on a few shorts with some other people that had gone through. One in particular, Adrian Peckett. He was self-taught for the most part, so there's an argument. He was probably like one of the most skilled people I knew, and he was self-taught. But anyway, I went from shooting sports to then like doing a bit of focus pulling with Adrian Peckett and a bunch of other DOPs, and that was when I started to get into more planned, more production-based work. And definitely found a love for it. I found that although it was a lot slower paced, there was a lot more to learn. There was a high skill level. It was there was a greater appreciation, I think, in the end for what you're creating, and that led then to trying to get into assisting on TV series like Ideal and This Is England, and did some dailies on This Is England and did the season 7 of Ideal, and that was a great learning curve of being on a bigger production that was completely studio based.
How did you find, obviously, the difference from coming from the ENG to the studio? Because this is something that I'm coming across a lot at the moment, is that I found the transition from sort of doing the more ENG work to that, it was a bit of a strange sort of situation to be in that everything's sort of siloed and everybody's got their job. And coming from something where you're expected to do everything to basically having your own job and you stick to it. I mean, how strange was that for you at the beginning, and how quickly did you sort of adapt to that and working with these bigger teams?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's definitely intimidating at first, but if you do the same thing day in, day out and you get too used to it, you're not really learning. So it's a good thing to step outside of your comfort zone, especially on those sets. Like as soon as you walk in, because there's it's a huge warehouse full of these huge sets, and there's hundreds of people running around, and yeah, it's really intimidating. But I mean, once you find your little crew, and hopefully you start off by having a nice little camera team where everyone's pretty good to each other, then hopefully it's less intimidating to find your way. But I mean, it was interesting because that was shot at the BBC studios, and at the time I also knew other ENG BBC guys, and I was traineeing on Ideal, so which by all means could be one of the busiest roles on the set. But anyway, I would step off set at the end of the day, and I stepped off set with the grip and the focus puller, and one of the camera guys, BBC ENG camera guys, walked past, and he said, "Oh, Matt, hey, how you going?" And he said, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a camera assistant on this TV show." And he goes, "Oh, what do you mean assisting?" I said, "Oh, I'm assisting the focus pull. I'm assisting the second AC." And he goes, "Oh, but you're a camera operator. I don't understand." And the grip turned to me and was like, "Oh, you're a camera operator?" He said, like they both. It was so. Those industries are so kind of like separate that they didn't. Like in drama, they couldn't understand that you could be a camera operator, and the NG operator couldn't understand why I was being an assistant.
So I want to just fast forward a little bit, and probably to around 2010, I'm going to say, there or thereabouts. When you first started out properly on your own as a freelancer, how did you go about finding the work?
Yeah, so that was actually before I started doing the assisting on the drama work.
Okay.
But in terms of getting the work, that was, roughly several months after Channel M had gone down, and I was freelancing with other companies' cameras, doing the sports broadcast stuff. But then I was also bought a DSLR and started doing my own companies. Stuff. I mean, a lot of people around that time had been made redundant from Channel M, so they'd all gone their separate ways, and we all kind of went on our own different paths and found our own work. And I think the work got passed from one person to the other, obviously when they were double booked, triple booked, or whatever. I just couldn't do it. And so I think a lot of work actually came from the network that I'd had at Channel M originally.
So talking about networking, how important was it that you obviously built and maintained those relationships with other operators, other DOPs, so you could pass work backwards and forwards? How vital was that in terms of getting your career going?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest part. I think probably like most industries, network is huge. It's probably one of the most important things, especially in this industry. And at that time, I never cold called any clients, never went direct to client. It was all production companies. It was always a referral of some kind from networking, either from Channel M or through university. So yeah, I mean, that network was invaluable. It's probably the most important thing.
You've built up your network. You've established your sort of career and your footings in Manchester and the UK as well, and obviously doing a lot of ENG work and things around Europe as well. And then you decide to throw it all in the bin and move to Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me. Obviously, people want to know why you moved there. I know the answer for that, but why did this come about, and how difficult was it to obviously start completely from scratch again?
Yeah, so I should probably say why I did it to avoid people thinking I should have been on Crime Stoppers. But yeah, it was as most people move overseas for. It was for a woman, for an Australian woman. So yeah, that was the primary reason for moving. It certainly wasn't for work, although it has been. I must say the industry here and the people here are amazing. They're all super welcoming. But yeah, it was a huge setback because I knew absolutely nobody here, and I think that's probably the first time that I have ever started approaching production companies or freelancers and trying to introduce myself, trying to go out for coffees, trying to go for meetings, joining the ACS, which is same as the BSc, and trying to network through those areas. And to be honest, there were some dire phone calls when I began, because obviously Brisbane, for one, is not the biggest metropolitan area in Australia. So, work is, I suppose, more limited here than it is in Sydney or Melbourne. So again, like we we were restricted to begin with. Like, could have made it easier on ourselves. So yeah, I mean, some of those calls, like luckily there was a few people on my CV that we had in common with production companies here, funnily enough. So other expats that had moved over, and they knew a few of the directors or DOPs. So that was a nice talk.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Although no work, I can't say any work really came from that, but it was nice to pick the brains and see what they thought of the industry here. But I remember one call in particular that it was an expat, and they just said, I must have been about 4 months in, and they said, it's not like England. There's no work here. Like, it's really limited. You're going to find it really hard. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah,
Confidence inspiring. Yeah.
And I must have sounded so down that she rang me back, and she was like, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. Which was very nice of her. But it must have taken me, 6 months before I started to build up work and start to do corporate for a few local production companies. And then I suppose it was a case of building up the quality of work from there. So from there, it took probably another half a year to get into documentary, and then another year after that to get into commercials. It was a slow process. And I mean, like, my network here is still very small, and that's one of the things I'm trying to improve at the moment. I mean, just because it is so important.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And I remember when you first said you were going and being sort of quietly worried. You won't mind me telling you this, but definitely not because I doubted you, but I was just worried that you had to basically just start all over again. Now you've moved there and you've had some time to settle and obviously understand the industry. How different is it from the UK? Is it different?
The industry here as well is completely different to the industry in England. And it took me a while to figure that out. And that in England, I suppose the companies are a lot bigger and everyone is like 95% of the industry is freelancers, whereas here, most of the corporate or even the commercial stuff, even some of the drama stuff, like they're smaller companies. They're maybe anywhere between 2 to 15 people companies, and you don't really get much bigger than that other than the big feature films.
Are they in-house staff as well?
Most of the producers are mainly in-house, and then on the smaller like corporate production companies, they're usually made up of a director and a cinematographer, or a producer and a cinematographer, like it's a two-man band.
Yeah. While you've been out there, you've worked on some good projects that I've seen so far. So stuff for Nat Geo that turned into a Netflix series. You got a ton of broadcast credits and TVC work as well. So do you want to just talk us through a couple of the standout projects that you've worked on since you've been out there? After that first year of kind of stepping more so away from corporate and going into documentary, it got a lot more interesting. And those series were 72 Dangerous Animals, which was a lot of fun, which got to work with a lot of very skilled people, and got to interview a lot of very interesting people too. I can't say I had, because I'm not specialised in the area of filming wildlife. I've worked with the people that were specialised in the filming of wildlife, so it was more interesting to speak to them as opposed to, I suppose, the shoot itself. But obviously, it's a huge crew and many contributors for that type of show. But just tell me a little bit. Talk me through, obviously, the bits that you were involved in.
So, funnily enough, those programs are Asia and Latin America. But a lot of the cameramen, because they produce this show in Perth, but a lot of the crews are based all over the world. So we just got to travel within Australia, which is not as interesting as it sounds after you've heard the show Dangerous Animals Asia or Latin America. But yeah, we basically went around Australia, flew around to speak to all the specialists, the doctors that were specialists in that particular animal.
What are the main differences that you feel between the UK and Australian productions? Do you think the training that you've had in the UK has put you in a more advantageous position over there? Are UK crews seen as well-skilled, well-trained crews? Yeah,
definitely. I think British crews are renowned all over the world for being great, hard-working crews with good foundations and good training. I mean, Australia has some, as well, like similarly has fantastic crews, and the same with New Zealand as well, who's just next door. And a lot of American productions come over, and Australian crews are known again for being highly skilled and highly trained and hardworking. But I think definitely coming from England, there is respect because the content's the content that's made there. And, you know, I mean, like the BBC, arguably, it's the start of broadcast. So, or the founder of broadcast. So, when you come from the motherland that's created broadcast, it counts for something.
And what do you see as the main sort of differences between UK crews and Australian crews, the sort of cultural differences?
I think the crews, and certainly in bigger productions in England, is everyone's a lot more serious. It's kind of like being in the army. I would relate it to, although I've not been in the army, but that's what I imagine it would be like. Whereas here in Australia, those bigger productions, everyone seems a lot more less stressed, and that doesn't necessarily make it more effective or not. It does make it a less stressful place to work, and in terms of team build, it could have just been the crew that I've worked with as well.
Yeah, I've spent a little bit of time in Australia, not too much, and obviously nowhere near as much as yourself. But I myself, even just sort of traveling around, I find that there's a different attitude to work-life balance over there, and I think they've probably got it the right way round. Do you think that's actually the case?
I think, yeah, there's definitely more of a work-life balance, particularly in Brisbane. I mean, I do travel around a lot, but I can't say, you know, I haven't lived in Sydney and I haven't lived in Melbourne, and those are obviously bigger metropolitan areas. So I can't say if it's the same for them, but there's a nice work-life balance here, much more than you would find in England, I think.
So yeah, on the thread of cultural differences and networking, I understand you were involved in filming the first cattle export from Australia to China.
Oh.
Can you just explain to our listeners what that's about?
Yeah, it was a documentary that we were doing. It was actually the first live cattle export over to China since it was re-legalized, which was a point of contention at the time. So it's kind of like an investigative documentary. But we went over to Perth, and we're filming the ship over there, and we did our stint for a week over in Perth, and then several weeks later we went over to China for when the boat was arriving. And that was definitely interesting in terms of cultural differences, because when we got there was a fixer that was Chinese, Singaporean Chinese. He was helping us out, and he was great to deal with. But when we arrived there, we kind of met the team of people that we'd be working with, the Chinese officials. And there was a guy, a Chinese army official, Chinese policeman, quarantine and inspection, and there was all of us from Australia, Singapore and New Zealand, and there must have been about 20 of us sat in a big round table, and I think that's customary for business meetings in China. But I certainly wasn't used to the culture, and I didn't realise what was going to happen on the first night, because we ended up all having to get very drunk, as is apparently customary in China for the first time you meet each other. We ended up having many beers and doing a shot for every time someone did a speech, and it was customary for every single person on that table to do a speech and kind of stand up and say why they were thankful to be there and thankful to be surrounded by the people that you're surrounded by. So that was 20 shots of this rice wine. I'm not sure how strong it was, followed by shots of beer, and so by the end of it, we ended up everyone got on very well, thankfully. There were no arguments, but we ended up staggering home with army officials and China inspection and quarantine, which was an eye opener, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. We're going to take a quick break here just to remind you about a competition that we're running to win a signed copy of Doug Allen's book Freeze Frame. We'll be back shortly.
Under the Lights podcast.
Hello, it's me again, back to tell you about our fantastic competition that we've got to win a personalised and signed copy of Doug Allen's book, Freeze Frame. All you have to do is answer the following question, which is, Doug Allen graduated from university in 1973 with a degree in which subject? That is, Doug Allen graduated from university in 1973 with a degree in which subject? Send your answers to hello@utlpod.com, short for Under the Lights Pod, and we'll draw a winner at random on our Facebook page at UTL Pod at the end of this series. Get your entries in now.
Under the Lights Podcast.
Welcome back to the Under the Lights Podcast, and we're here still with Matt Davies. Matt, I just wanted to jump straight back in there and where you're at now. Let's talk about that. You've obviously spoken about going down the first AC route, coming away from the DOP route. Is that to give you access to the bigger projects, and what's your thought process behind that?
So a lot of the so I've been here now, I think it's about 4.5 years, and I'm happy with what I managed to achieve in 4.5 years. But
definitely, you should be really proud.
Oh, cheers.
Yeah.
But I definitely want to work up to those bigger productions, where primarily in commercials, and also, maybe if I can move into narrative and make it work with a family, that would be ideal. But I think maybe commercials is a more realistic expectation.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we should point out is that we've both got young families as well, and I think commercials tend to be shorter jobs. It tends to be 1 or 2 days in comparison to feature films and even short films, which can be sort of last for weeks, months. Was that a conscious decision to pursue the commercials because of that reason?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you can be on a feature or a TV series for anywhere between like 6 weeks to 6 months or longer. And you usually, I suppose, if you're in that circle, you can hop from one to the next to the next. And I mean, I know people who have families and they do that, and they make it work for them, which is great. But I think for me personally, I don't think I could do that. So I think commercials is a conscious decision to try and have that happy medium between having a family life and having work in the area I want to work.
So yeah, and just to reiterate, what steps are you taking to obviously get those bigger projects? At
the moment, I mean, some of the commercials here, like anywhere, I suppose they go into the hundreds of thousands, maybe more, and I suppose at the moment per day. So at the moment, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say you'd trust me with a couple of $100,000 a day. But I mean, a lot of that is also the fact that when I have been a cinematographer on commercials, it's within, because it's completely different size production. It's a completely different network. And so I've tried to step back to focus pulling and go into that higher end as a focus puller in order to network in those areas and eventually work up that hierarchy.
Do you find that you're almost able to stand back a little bit and observe the DOPs in those situations as well and learn a little bit more from them as well that way, from working that closely with them? Yeah,
definitely. And that's really nice. It's just, it's, I suppose, great to have a mentor, and it's really hard to find, or I at least have found it's really hard to find a mentor, especially as you get older as well. So it's kind of nice to step back to AC in order to see other people work, the way that they do things. And it's not just necessarily from a technical point of view. It's, being a cinematographer or a DOP is how to be a manager, how to direct crew, and that's a huge part of the job. And it's on the bigger productions, it's good to see, it's good to learn from them how to manage people and which ways of managing is more effective than another, where the crews are happier because the DOP is kind of creating that culture that as we said before, it kind of streams down from there. So
you've hit the nail on the head there, and that's something that's massively overlooked, I think, especially if you come from a self-shooting sort of one-man band background as well. I think the actual main role of a DOP is to do that, is to manage. And that's something that obviously have been fortunate enough to be on bigger sets and actually observe DOPs. I think that's a huge part of something that you need to develop and you need to work on and sort of personally develop as well, is that ability to manage like big teams of people.
Yeah, because I think on the bigger commercials that I've done, like I think the biggest commercial I've done had about 40 crew on it, which was, for me, that was huge. And I didn't know, like I was trying to help everyone. I was trying to talk to everyone, and I guess I didn't. If I would have spent more time working with bigger crews, then I would have known that you only need to direct your focus at a few people that will then direct their focus at their teams.
I just want to take 2 minutes just to talk about kit as well. I've always been one to invest in the best kit that you can afford and then go out there and sort of market yourself with the kit, because I think a lot of producers in the UK, and I don't know if this is the case in Australia, in the UK, if you're outside of London, there's almost an expectation that you come with the kit. They don't want to be messing about hiring in and things unless you live in the capital, where a lot of my friends who are DOPs and they'll just rent in whatever kit they need. I feel like, and I use this analogy before, I feel like the kid that's turning up with the brand new football on the school field, when you turn up with a decent camera to a shoot, and you're not necessarily the best sort of player there, but you've sort of almost cheated by sort of buying your way onto the production by having the better camera. Do you think that sort of helps?
In terms of whether you get the better jobs, I think it depends on what kind of standard you're at. I mean, those high-end commercials, like you're saying, like they're going to hire a different set of lenses for every commercial, depending on the look that they want or whatever narrative, whatever it is.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of would be to your detriment to own a pair of lenses if that's the area, or same with the camera. It'd be to your detriment to own those things because you just wouldn't get use out of them enough. But certainly, owning a camera does always help, I think.
Do you think it's different depending on which area of the industry you work in? For example, ENG sports and things like that, there is that expectation carried that you turn up with your own kit. I feel that that's the case anyway. Do you think that it's different across the different sort of disciplines in the industry? Yeah,
that's probably a good way to differentiate it. Is definitely with. I mean, I don't really know many of the news guys anymore, but the guys that always did really well were the guys that owned their own kit, and it was the same with sports as well. And then with corporate, you kind of have to have your own kit, and with documentary, it's the same as ENG and sports, I suppose. Is again, you've got to have your own kit for the most part, unless it's the very highest end of documentary, and then with lower end commercials, I mean, if you own an Alexa Mini, or you own a Red camera of whatever kind, then it will probably be to your advantage, and that you can probably work out deals with production. But at the end of the day, you've still got to do a great job, and that's probably the most important thing.
Could we just take 2 seconds to just talk about your kit? You've shot. Did you start on FS7 when you went over to Australia? You've moved on to F5, and now you're on Red Ranger.
Yeah. So
is that right? Have I got that right?
That's right. Yeah. But no, it's funny because I did go from FS7 to F5, and the reason was, which F5 is obviously a lot older camera than the FS7, but the reason was because the work I was in at the time. When I first got here, after that first year, was documentary, and a lot of the producers seemed to be asking for F5 because that's what they were used to. And I would say to them, but the FS7, the image quality is pretty much the same. In fact, the blacks are probably less noisy. And they just, I'd end up hiring an F5 every time just because they knew the F5 and they weren't willing to give the FS7 a go. And then 2 years later, they're not asking for F5 anymore. Now they're asking for FS7s, and I got rid of it for an F5.
But that's okay. It's a strange one. It's what's sort of happening in the industry with the Blackmagic gear, which is absolutely amazing camera, amazing image for the cost of what it is. But there's this real reluctance to sort of take it up on projects, and we still keep getting requested FS7s on probably 90% of the things that we're doing.
I don't think I would have ever bought an F5 if it wasn't for the fact that producers were asking for it. I think the image quality that comes out of the Blackmagic, the Ursas, the colour science is kind of superior to the Sonys, but broadcast companies, they know Sony. That's what they've used for decades, so that's what they know, it's reliable, and that's why they keep using it.
Just finally on your kit, you've just invested in a Red Ranger Gemini as well. So tell me what the decision was behind that, and more importantly, how you see that opening doors for you as well.
So I bought it about 3/4 through last year, and it was for a job that we've been doing for the last couple of years, which was Centre, which is Chris Hemsworth's sports app. And we'd been hiring Alexa Minis to do the promo stuff for a long time, and then we'd been switching between Red, and that was between the Epic and the Gemini. And because the main DOP actually owned a Gemini, and of course he liked the look, he liked the different look to it. But that was one of the primary reasons we went with Gemini. And then at the end of last year, we decided we would have 2 cameras, 2 Geminis on a number of the upcoming shoots, which was basically like 6 weeks straight of work. So in Australia, the cameras, they rent for quite a lot because the population is lower, and I suppose the demand's lower, but the prices of the cameras still stay the same. So they tend to rent out for more. So I bought the camera for that 6 weeks of work, knowing that it would kind of reimburse probably 1/3 of the purchase cost. And I would say in general, looking at the Gemini, you've probably got 1 year to 2 years I'd say 1 year to make your money back on it, and maybe a second year to make profit on it before it kind of goes out of date. And I mean, it's not that you need a new camera because it's out of date. It's just what's in demand.
Exactly. We've unfortunately come to the end of the podcast, Matt, but we've just got time to do our obligatory desert island kit list. So I'll set the scene. You've crash landed on a desert island. You've got 3 pieces of kit with you that you can take to document your time on the island: 1 light, 1 camera, and 1 lens. What would you take with you, and why?
I'd be interested to know if everyone has pretty much the same answers. Is it, say, Alexa Mini? Because it's probably the most versatile camera you can get at the moment. In terms of lens choices, I think the LF is probably, it is not quite there yet. For lens, probably the Angenieux EZs, the 30-90, if I had to choose one of the lens.
Oh, yeah.
It's a bit of a workhorse, and it's very adaptable.
It's interesting.
And in terms of a light, well, if you're on a desert island, can I just choose fabrics instead?
Yeah, we'll let you. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, like working in Australia, that was probably one of the biggest learning curves, was learning how to deal with the sun. So I'd choose a super bounce with on one side and a neg on the other, and control the sun and use the sun as my main source.
That's perfect. I think, to be honest, you're the only person that's gone for a motion camera as well. I think everybody else has gone for stills, so I like that. I like that you've gone for the Alexa.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
There we go. And that's the end of episode 4 of the Under the Lights podcast. I want to say a huge thank you to Matt Davies for joining us for this week's episode. It's been a massive pleasure to talk to you again. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, you can support the pod by dropping us a like, comment, subscribe, or share. If you have any comments or audience questions that you'd like to submit for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing hello@utlpod.com. I want to thank you once again sincerely for listening. The audience numbers have been absolutely fantastic, so thank you so much for supporting us. The next episode is out next Monday. I've been Cy Gamble, and I'll see you soon.
Under the Lights Podcast.